Hello, everybody, and welcome to Creating Conscious Relationships with Jon and Catherine Graham.
Hello, hello.
And tonight's topic, we're going to be talking about the abandonment wound and what that looks like on a personal experience, how that shows up in relationships, and what you can do about it. Because just because you have an abandonment wound doesn't mean you have to operate from an abandonment wound.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's probably the most common wound or thing that people suffer from. It's when you look deep into abandonment, it is everywhere. And it doesn't have to be a big event, but it's subtle and it is very impactful and it does kind of form your opinions on different things in certain ways.
Yeah. And so, in our experience with the abandonment wound, I knew for quite a while that I carried the abandonment wound. And for a very long time, I had equated the abandonment that I had experienced to my father's passing when I was 16. And then it wasn't until, I guess, about 5 years ago, so about 20 years after his passing, I realized that there was a lot more connected to his passing that had been blind spots to me that had only amplified that feeling of being abandoned. Um, and then as I got more curious about it, started to recognize that because I had been so sick as a child, in and out of the hospital a lot of times, there was a lot of feelings of abandonment at that point in time too. Um, and what's interesting about that is my parents were actually being the most loving parents they could be by having me go to the hospital and take care of me and, be physically taken care of by the hospital staff and whatnot. But the feeling of being alone in a hospital bed time after time after time, it felt like a lot of abandonment. And so it showed up in many different ways in that way for myself. Did you want to share? Because we're kind of opposite when it came to abandonment.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of realized this, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think after I realized what I was going through, so to let everybody know, when Kate was on the Camino, yeah, I felt very lonely, and I would say that there was an abandonment piece there, but wasn't. We talked every day, but I felt it in my body. It uh, I felt my ego saying, stuff like, "Oh, you're not good enough," or "You're this," or "You're that," which was obviously not the case or anything like that. But um, I started looking. I got curious about it, and it wasn't for a long time that I actually realized what it was. But when I realized what I was feeling, and that was part of abandonment, it was like it felt so much better. It felt so relieving to go, oh, this is what this is. Then I got curious and I started looking at other aspects of my life. When else have I felt this way? And it was just amazing to see all these little markers, as I would call them, of, oh, you felt this way at this point, or you felt this way at that point. And it all went back to kind of that abandonment piece.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you bring up such a great point because it's that feeling of vulnerability or that feeling of abandonment that comes up. And a lot of times we don't recognize it. In that experience for you, it was really only highlighted because I was on the Camino. So you were here by yourself, taking care of the kids and doing work and all of this. And yes, we were talking every day.
Yeah.
And it was not even like it was from the beginning. It was about halfway through the Camino
Yep.
journey, and it just kind of hit you
Yep.
out of nowhere. Um, and so that feeling comes up, and then the ego steps in, and the ego starts to tell us, this is what this means. This is what's happening right now. And the ego's not going to go, hey, this is your abandonment wound. The,
No,
the ego
no.
isn't clear
The
like
ego's
that.
gonna feed that. It's be like, yeah, this is why this is this way.
Yeah,
And
you're alone right now
yeah,
because you're not good enough. You're alone
yeah,
right now because they don't love you. You're alone right now because X, Y, and Z, fill in the blanks, your ego will do whatever it can to kind of dismantle you and uh, really create a story that's not necessarily true, but it feels like it's true.
Oh yeah, oh I call it the ego hijack because it's like, okay, you're already feeling this way because if you don't, for me anyways, when I didn't know what I was feeling, I knew I was feeling, I wouldn't say depressed,
Vulnerable.
vulnerable, but it was, it just wasn't what the same, whatever. But it wasn't like my ego was pointing me in the right direction to abandonment. It was like giving me everything that I'd ever done wrong in my life and why I was this way and why that way. And it was like throwing all this stuff up. And it was just like, ugh. And it wasn't until I actually realized what it was that I could go back and go, ah, ego, you're not right here. You're trying to like keep this story going. And yeah, it wasn't the case. It was just the ego just needed to be calm and be like, hey, you know what? Things are gonna be all right. Just take it easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the greatest trick, I think, of the ego is it essentially gets formed from our very early childhood experiences. And just like a child doesn't really understand what's happening in the world, the ego is formed from a place that doesn't have a full understanding as to what's happening. And so it will create these, again, stories or these illusions that say, you're not lovable. And then it will list, because it remembers, it will list every single time that you have felt unloved, but it will tell you it's because you are unlovable. Do you understand? There's a difference there. It's not that you are unlovable, it's that you felt unloved.
Yeah.
And so then the ego goes, it's because I'm unlovable. And then it just keeps repeating that story over and over and over again, which is actually an abandonment from our divinity. It's an abandonment from our true identity, which is we are loved, which is we are worthy. But the ego will hijack and make us abandon what we know to be true to believe in what this illusion is or what this story is of what our human experience is in that particular moment.
Yeah, and I was gonna say it can be super subtle. Like it is doesn't have to be this big event.
Yeah.
And then social media, not all social media, but I find a lot of social media feeds that where it'll show you like why, you look at your neighbor or wherever, oh, they have this or they have that or they have the perfect life and da 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 da. So that makes your ego go, okay, yeah, this is why you don't have this, and it keeps you down. And right at that point, you're abandoning yourself
Yeah.
because you're looking at what somebody else has versus what you have and who's supporting you.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the kind of blind spots when it comes to the abandonment wound is actually how many times you abandon yourself versus how many times other people have abandoned you. And we might be able to look the finger at everybody else and go, nope, they abandoned me here and they abandoned me there, and they didn't support me with this, and this. And, keep yourself in that kind of blame game. But when you get really honest with yourself and ask yourself, have I abandoned myself? Have I abandoned my values? Have I abandoned what I stand strong in? Because I know I have met multiple times
Yeah.
throughout my life, trying to belong, trying to fit in, trying to keep relationships, trying to keep the peace. There's things that you don't say because you're like, I don't want to bring conflict into the situation if I speak my truth here. And so there's often we'll abandon ourselves, which only creates that abandonment wound to get kind of bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't make it any better. That's for sure. And I think that the biggest thing, I think for a lot of people, and I can only speak from myself, but I think for a lot of people is just to have that realization. to have that realization of what it is. It's like seeing that thing and going, haha, I found you. And now I want to know more about you. I want to know why. Why do you have this? Why is the ego um, reinforcing this abandonment feeling?
Mm.
And the ego, to me, feels empty, feels lost. So the ego starts making up that story of, oh, this or that or whatever, because it doesn't have a place. It doesn't, it feels abandoned.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ego, of course, it doesn't want to be abandoned, and the ego does not want to be left behind. Right. So it, well, essentially, it's kind of a twofold thing, because in one sense, it will tell you these are all the reasons that you're going to be abandoned. These are all the reasons why these people are abandoning you. These are also all the reasons why you need to abandon yourself. And so it becomes this twofold kind of a situation where you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, depending on what part of the ego is showing up and what you're listening to, which is why I think it's so important to consistently go within, to connect with your own divinity, to connect with your own worth, to connect with yourself, so that you can remember these deeper truths of who you are and what your life has been and what your life is becoming. Because even in what those experiences are of early childhood abandonment, um, we can receive that information and make it mean something that it doesn't necessarily mean. Um, we can receive that information and create an entire identity out of what that experience has been. And the ego doesn't want to lose that identity, because the ego actually gets to almost become more formed because it has that identity now. Right. So if you're a victim, or if you're unlovable, or you're unworthy, or whatever the case might be, if the ego has this identity, then it knows who it is, quote unquote. Um,
Yeah, and it's going to continue. It's like
it wants
it's
to follow
hungry
that
after that,
narrative.
right? It's like, no, no, I'll keep this going. I'll keep this story going.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, it's a character it gets
yeah.
to become, and then
Well,
it.
that's kind of what I was going to say is I'm talking about ego. I know some people get, I won't say triggered by the word or whatever, but we're talking about that voice in your head, right? We're talking about, not about, oh, this person has a big ego or
Mm.
da. We're talking about all those stories, those voices that are like, oh no, you're not this or you're not that. That is that ego self piece. And it's not a bad thing. And when we say the word ego, a lot of people are like, oh, you get this gross feeling about the ego, but really, the ego is there to protect you, and it's interesting because that's all it really wants to do.
Yes, yes. And I would just like to bring up, when we talk about the ego wanting to protect us, I think it's important to remember that it might be a 2-year-old version of us
Mhm.
that's showing up to protect us, right? And so we wouldn't allow a 2-year-old to drive a bus. So we don't want to allow a 2-year-old ego to run our lives. We can be aware that it's there, and we can speak to our ego like it's the 2-year-old. We can have that kind of separation to be able to go, this ego part of me, this 2-year-old wounded part of me, or even just this part of me is showing up right now and telling me that this is what this means, or it's terrified, or it's feeling abandoned, or it's feeling separated, or whatever. And the only way to truly kind of help that ego piece uh grow is, I guess is what I would call it, is to kind of help it grow up, is to actually sit and listen to it.
Yeah.
But not listen to it and go, yeah, you're right. Just like if a 2-year-old came to you and said, there's monsters under my bed right now, you're not going to look at them and go, yeah, you're right, there are monsters under your bed and they're going to eat you tonight. You don't say that.
It's
You
that
can.
curious piece, right? Like
Yes.
get curious about your ego. Why are you feeling this way?
Yeah.
And we were talking about this earlier, was that some of this trauma, sometimes abandonment trauma or abandonment in itself, can be transcended through generations. You may have had a perfect life and nobody's ever left you, and da 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 da, but you constantly have this fear that everybody's going to leave
Mm,
you.
yeah.
And that can be transcended through generations. But I do really believe that when you see it and you say it and you recognize it and you have that conversation with yourself, with your ego, then it does subside and you start to get a
Yeah.
better grip on like, okay, this is not a bad thing. It sounds like it's terrible, it sounds scary, but it really is not.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just the same as like when you're in relationship with someone. When if I have something that's coming up that's triggering me and it's upsetting me, and I take it to him and I say, hey, this is what's going on and this is how I'm feeling and whatnot. If he was to, turn away from me and go, I'm not listening to this, or this is BS, or yeah, you're absolutely right, whatever you're feeling right now, it's garbage, or whatever, I would feel that kind of abandonment because he's not showing up in a way that I want him to. But if I was to say to him, hey, this is the way I'm feeling, and he's looking at me, he's listening to me, he's getting curious, he's asking questions, he's holding space, then I don't feel that abandonment, right? And it to me, it's like an outer replication
Yeah.
of that conversation that you can have with yourself, because it's not his job to save me, but he can show me how I can have a better relationship with myself.
Yeah, I'm just gonna chime in there and say that it's the perception, right? It's you may feel like you're being abandoned because I'm not giving you that response
Mm,
that you're looking for, but that's your perception because you created this thought that this is what's going to happen.
mm.
So now you've reinforced that abandonment
Yeah, yeah.
and you've given it that fire to go, oh, see, here's a prime example. Now listen to me again.
Mm,
Meanwhile, you've done this to yourself.
yeah,
And that's the one thing that it like I think for me was again getting out of my own way. It was like, you're doing this to yourself. Nobody is causing this but you.
yeah.
So start getting curious and why, but why, and continue that.
And I think just what I was trying to come down to there, and I totally appreciate what you've just said, was essentially to listen to your ego the same way you would want a partner to listen to you, the same way you would want a friend to listen to you. Um, to not reprimand, to not judge, to not condemn, but to just simply listen and hear what that voice inside has to say. Get curious about it, dig deeper,
Mm.
allow yourself to feel all of the emotions that are coming up. Because a lot of times we don't want to feel those uncomfortable emotions. We want to get back to just feeling good. But it does, sometimes we have to dig deeper into the emotions, feel the emotions, express the emotions in order to be able to actually transcend those emotions.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because of the abandonment piece. When I started getting curious and I started looking at like the past and all this kind of stuff, I came to a lot of realizations about a lot of things. I mean, I had to draw the line to say, okay, yeah, you know what? The past is the past. We're moving on from there. Yeah, everybody makes mistakes. But there was a lot of things that I'm like, wow. An example that I said about not sharing gifts. I know how to do this, I know how to do that, but yet I was holding it, waiting for some big event to share these things with people. And I mean, doing this is a prime example.
Yeah.
It was the abandonment piece that I never knew I had took me on a journey to realize that gifts are made to be shared, not at a time always. And so it's that piece and the ego can really lock you in this box. And you just really need to harmonize with your ego. It doesn't have to be a tug of war. It doesn't have to be, oh, right, wrong, this, that. It just, like you said, it just needs to be a conversation with yourself to like, okay, what do we need here? And is this real?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you bring up about sharing the gifts because um, it is often so many people will abandon what their dreams are, abandon their gifts, abandon what they're good at. Um, to, I guess, to protect themselves, which again is that kind of egoic piece that's stepping in to go, we've got to protect this gift that we have, this thing that we want to share, this voice that you have, this art that you want to create. The ego will come in and go, no, we can't do it because it's not perfect yet, or have to wait for a special occasion. It's like bringing out the special china every time there's
Yeah.
a special dinner instead of just using the china because you love it. Um, and so you want to share the very best parts of you, right? Um, and you've been doing it so amazingly over the past couple of months of like creating food for us and having people over for dinners. And you've been creating art and music and all of this. So it's,
Unlock the box.
yes, because it really is about expressing ourselves out in the world instead of keeping ourselves locked up within ourselves, wanting to express, but not giving ourselves that permission, which again goes into that abandonment, right? How many times do you abandon your own expression or what it is that you're trying to express?
Well, and that's another thing that you brought up a good point is, when somebody has told you, oh, you're not good at this, you're going, how many of us have went and go, oh, I'm not good at this, I'm going to abandon this and I'm going to do something else, even though you wanted to do it.
Yeah.
You're not good, or you don't look, or whatever, you don't fit in, and you instantly, okay, yes, I will assimilate and I will fit into whatever I need to fit into.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad too, right? Like that
Absolutely. We're so easily misled.
Yeah.
And whether it's misled because we're feeling abandoned by people, or we're misled because I guess it is, I get a feeling of abandonment. If someone's not honoring what it is that you're trying to express, right? And we're willing to abandon that part of ourselves, it's again because we're so afraid of having them abandon us.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're like, okay, I'll let this go if you'll stay around.
Yeah.
Instead of honoring the part of us that really just wants that thing.
Yeah. That connection, right? That's that community, that togetherness. Um, yeah, it is very, very tricky. And again, when you start adding in that, this may not be a part of your life, it gets even trickier because some people know their ancestral line, some people don't.
Yeah.
And you don't know those instances of maybe somebody was, I don't know, given up for adoption or was left alone or whatever the case may be, and it's affecting you. But it's very difficult to understand where it's coming from. But I would say everybody has this feeling. Everybody has experienced this. So,
well, I mean, we were talking earlier today too about just how deeply rooted that abandonment wound can be. And yes, coming down through generations with generational trauma and whatnot. But even that moment that we come into the world, when we're separated from our mother's stomach, they cut the umbilical cord, and then we're just this tiny baby in a brand new that feeling can also be abandonment, right? We were in this nice, cozy, warm spot, feeling all good and stuff. And then we're in this big, cold world and we're being handled by all these people. And I know you were in the NICU when you were a baby, so that would have felt like abandonment. I know I've got one child that was also in the NICU for 9 days when he was born. And so there's an abandonment wound there because I couldn't touch him or hold him or anything like that. So these can all leave impressions or screenshots on your brain of this is what abandonment is. And then we try our whole lives to prevent ourselves from feeling that way again. And in a messed up way, we end up recreating that experience again and again and again and again.
Yeah, and I was going to say again that a necessity to be abandoned because you're not put into whatever in the NICU and all that stuff. You're not going to survive, so it's a necessity.
Yeah,
it's not a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, and we just need to turn the switch on that, I think.
Well, yeah, and it's about really understanding that story and understanding why things were chosen that needed to be chosen in that way.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to my son, he needed to be in the NICU. You know, I couldn't touch him because it was safest for him to not be touched. I think for the first 5 days. I think after day 6, I was able to like put my hand in, and day 7, I was able to hold on to him. But it was all for the benefit of him. So it's done through love. And yet sometimes how we receive it doesn't necessarily feel like love.
Yeah. Yeah. You start having to ask that question, right? Like, is this not that is this abandonment, but is this the appropriate feeling for this abandonment?
Okay.
You know what I mean? Not should I feel angry
Mm,
or
okay.
should I feel sad or should I feel whatever because, or is this something that I need to
What?
really think about in my own on my own?
Yeah, and to me, I because I go into the emotions and through the compassion key sessions and whatnot, to me it's understanding that that newborn that's in the NICU, of course you felt sad. Of course you felt abandoned. Of course you felt completely alone in this world. Of course you were lost and afraid. Um, and whatever other emotions might be coming up for that wounded part of us or that abandoned part of us, um, to give that part compassion, to give that part love and whatnot, and help them to grow through that compassion and love to understand the story in a new way. And you can think your way through it.
Mhm.
And maybe it's a better process for you, but for me, it's like almost emotionally feeling my way through it and allowing myself to really get into the depths of the emotion and then go, oh,
Well, and I think
right.
that's kind of where I'm going to say that some of the difference between men and women, it's that logic base, right? It's like I said this before, is that root cause analysis. I want to find why did this happen? Okay. And then just keep tracing it back to go to that root cause to say, okay, this is where it started.
Yeah.
And can you do anything about it? Well, you can, because you can control your own thoughts and mind and whatnot. Um, but yeah, I'm going further back. We all have abandoned. We all came from one,
Yeah.
and we all separated from that one. So we all have that marker of abandonment.
Yeah. That separation from source.
So we're never really abandoned because we're all from that source. And once you realize that you're never alone, you're never not good enough, you're never the worst, you're never any of all these stories that our ego has fed us, you come to this moment of peace where it's just like, wow,
Yeah.
it's truly, we are truly connected. And this is just you almost feel like this has been such a waste of time because you spent your life in these certain situations that have caused you to do this or that or whatever because you're compensating because of being abandoned or feeling abandoned or feeling lonely or whatever, when it wasn't the case. It was always you doing it to yourself,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is it
Yeah, you kind of, I know when I came to that realization of like, wow, I've been really feeding myself a story of being abandoned, of being alone, of being unworthy, of being unloved, and I've allowed myself to play victim to it for a very long time. And to come to the realization of, wow, I was so loved, or I am so loved. I am so worthy. I am so supported. I am one with the universe. And it's kind of a reckoning with the soul and a bit of a heartbreak,
yeah,
I would say, because
yeah.
you recognize and realize just how long you've participated in an illusion that you couldn't see through the veil of it. You couldn't see the truth of it. Um, when I was on the Camino, I'd met a man, Nikolai, who had been an orphan in Romania. And he had been there at the orphanage from, I believe, infanthood until he was 18 years old and aged out of the system. And he ended up getting into kind of an addictive lifestyle and living on the streets and whatnot. But when I met him on the Camino, he was a year clean. And he was going through a big realization at the time. Um, and what he had like really come to realize for himself and what he shared with me and kind of helped me open my heart a little bit more too was he had held so much anger towards his parents that had given him up for adoption. He had been so angry that he had been alone for so long in his life and that no one had been there. But in the year of recovery that he was in, he started to recognize that every single one of the people that were in the orphanage that took care of him, they stepped in and gave him love where he thought he was getting none. And the people that took him up to some mountain range, I don't remember the mountain range, but they'd take him up there on weekends and they'd teach him how to survive out in the wilderness and whatnot. He's like, and they loved me too. They supported me. And he was like having this whole reckoning and realization of all the times that love had shown up when he felt completely alone and how he had created this entire life story for himself based on how alone he was and how unsupported he was. And then had that realization of, oh, wow, I've always had someone, and I could look through my own life as well and go, when my dad had passed away and I was not living at home anymore, there was other adults who showed up. There was other people who, took me into their home, who gave me food, who helped me purchase clothes, who drove me to doctor's appointments and whatnot. And the gratitude that I felt for them when I came to this realization of, my parents couldn't be there for me at that point in time, but it gave so many other people an opportunity to show up for me. And how we've been able to do that for other people
Yeah.
as well. And I never really did it out of a, you owe me now or anything like that. It was just there's an opportunity to help someone. And so you step in and help someone. And I think it's so important for us to recognize all of these quote unquote earth angels that show up for people. Even the time in the hospital and stuff is how many nurses were taking care of you, I know in my experience, even as I say the nurses in the hospital, there's like 4 nurses' faces that show up in my mind every time I say that. And I imagine I must have been so loved and cared for by these nurses, even if I felt like I was being abandoned by my parents or not by being at home or whatever. Is there's always
Yeah.
people.
Well, it's funny because kind of goes back to that ego piece and perspective, right?
Yeah.
It's not the people that you expect or want to show
Mhm.
up, but you're always supported. You're never abandoned. It's an illusion.
Yeah.
And you just need to remove the perspective thought that you wanted this person to show up. Well, that you did this to yourself because you wanted them to show up. Well, somebody did show up.
Yeah.
And somebody will always show up.
Yeah. And yeah, it's that expectation of who should be showing up versus who is showing up. And we can feel so disappointed. I really wanted this person to show up and not recognize the other 10 people that did show up. So it's really important to be able to kind of look at all these different experiences that you've had in your life and just ask yourself, like, in what ways have I been telling myself this story over and over again? Because we do that. We repeat those memories in our minds, especially the ones that have hurt us the most. But in what ways have I been telling myself this story that allows me to be the victim to my own situation, that allows me to carry this pain forward? Right. One of the things that we were talking about, I think, yesterday was we have to be willing to abandon our old self, our old story,
Yes.
our old pain, if we want to step into the truth of who we are, right? So we've all had these life experiences that have piled up and they've told us maybe we're unworthy. Well, I have to abandon the part of me that feels unworthy in order for me to step into my worth. Right. And that ego piece is going to go, I don't want to do that because it doesn't realize it still exists in worthiness, but it's just a better role for it in worthiness.
Well, and it's used to what it's used to, right?
Yes.
Oh no, we're going to do something different. Oh, no, no,
Let me figure
no.
it out.
This is where abandonment's a good thing. You're abandoning a past for a better future,
Yeah.
but your ego's like, no, 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 we can't do this.
Yeah.
That's too scary. No, no, look at this is nice and easy and da 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 da. Don't have to worry about anything. Just stay where we are, and it will try to keep you back in that routine.
Yeah. Yeah. And how because we kind of transcended through that conversation to
Yeah.
conversations that we've been having with other people in our lives and things that we've been sharing with them, even us doing this talk right now. We're essentially inviting you to abandon the abandoned part of you, right? And so in us doing that, we're asking you to abandon a part of yourself, which means your ego might be going, I don't want to let go of what my story has
What
been.
are you guys talking
Yeah.
about?
And no, they need to shut up. They need to stop talking. Um, they're wrong, whatever it might be. And that's okay. If your ego's saying that right now, that's okay. We don't want it to be freaking out or anything. But to understand that sometimes we need to be willing to abandon these hurt parts of us, to abandon these unhealthy
Yeah.
parts of us.
I think we need to remember the parts of us that we're abandoning. It's just evolution.
Yes.
And those parts come from many different stories, many different things, many different generations. So are they really our story? Yes, no. We're the only ones getting in the way of that. We're the ones that can somewhat dictate that story or believe in the past story or create the new story.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how does this all work when it comes to relationships? The abandonment wound can definitely, I'm going to say, put a dark cloud over relationships at times. And I only say that because there's been times where I've been triggered by my abandonment wound and project it onto you or project it onto other people. And it's essentially my way of going, I've got this feeling that's coming up right now. I need to pull you in closer because I'm so afraid you're going to abandon me. But typically, because you're not aware that there's an abandonment wound that's happening or whatever in the past, um, it would lead to you, I guess, shutting down. And then I'd feel more abandoned, the silence. Oh, can't stand the silence. And so it can definitely play a role in relationships, especially in the dynamic between men and women, the way we process things.
Well, absolutely. And I think you gave a good example of that in the beginning where you're saying, if we're having a argument, discussion, whatever, and you don't feel like you're being heard, you are feeling abandoned.
Yeah.
But that is you, not your partner. So how it comes into partner is just remembering you own this piece.
Yeah.
It's not your partner making you feel abandoned. It is you that are doing that piece because you are having this idea that this person is going to show up this way and da 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 da. And you can transcend that through all of a lot of things that go on in your relationship. Well, so and so forgot your birthday or so and so. They didn't abandon you.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's not that I don't think anybody intentionally is out to hurt people. It is your perspective of what your birthday should be. So they're not necessarily abandoning you. Don't get me wrong. There are people that abandon people, and you know, yes, there's people that forget birthdays or don't do anything for birthdays. But how it comes up in relationships, I think, is having that knowledge and sharing that knowledge that maybe it's not the other person. Maybe it's I need to check myself first before I go in, fly off the handle. Why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? Well, check yourself first and have a discussion. You don't need to fly really off the handle. Just once you realize, okay, maybe I'm got a little more involvement in this than what I thought.
Yeah. Well, and that comes back down to the having conscious communication with your partner. Um, and honestly, I do believe the biggest beneficial thing that we've started to do is just being able to say to each other, hey, this is a part of me that's showing up right now. There's a trigger that's showing up right now. There's a wounded part, there's a fearful part, whatever it might be, to be able to start with that, to recognize that I'm an individual, he's an individual, but we've got our relationship as kind of a third part. This is the most important part. We want to have our relationship be the thing that we're honoring the most, and understanding we both have our own individual journeys within that relationship and have had our own individual journeys leading up to our relationship. And then how do we work within that together so that we're constantly honoring this, coming back to this, but also honoring what's happening for each other.
And again, goes back to what we talked about a few weeks ago, was about communication. Even when it's something so silly like you're having a feeling, I don't know, whatever the feeling of the day is, or talk to your partner about that. Don't let things fester. Don't let things boil up. It may be nothing. We start to make stories, which then gets the abandoned piece, the ego piece, and all this other stew mixing up. And really, if you just have that conversation, and sometimes it may be just a feeling that you're having, and your partner can help you talk through that.
Yeah.
It's being curious about, why am I feeling this way, and expressing that to your partner and saying, hey, I'm feeling this way. I don't know why I'm feeling this way. And we've had those discussions where it's like, I don't know why. And then I'll process it my way, you'll process it your way, and we throw those ideas back and forth to each other, and we come to, I won't say a resolution, but we at least have an understanding to where we're at, right?
Yeah,
like,
what's coming up and what that's creating between us. Yeah. And I think to be willing to have the conversations with your partner, if you are having feelings of abandonment, if you are feeling fearful or feeling enraged or angry or whatever it might be, but losing the attachment to what you expect them to change because you're feeling that way. And I know it was a process that I really had to learn, because I was, I guess, taught, or I guess most of us are taught, that you go to someone, you go, this is the problem, now you have to change. Right. And then they might come back and go, okay, well, now you need to change this. Now you need to change that. And yes, sometimes behavior does need to change, or something needs to shift a little bit. But recognizing that when you're bringing something to the table, an emotion that you feel to the table, it's just an emotion. And it might have been a behavior that they had that triggered that emotion, but that emotion is within you. You need to take responsibility for that emotion.
Don't do this.
Yes, the finger blame. And I know we were talking about that a few weeks ago on the who's to blame.
Right. Yeah.
But it's really about honoring yourself, going, I've got this emotion coming up right now. So you're honoring yourself, you're sharing it with your partner. So you're honoring them by expressing your truth to your partner, and they're honoring you by listening to what you have to say. Now, resolution, however, whatever that might be, there might not actually need to be a resolution. It might just be in expressing the emotion, that's the resolution, because it brings enough relief. The emotion has been expressed, it's been recognized, it's been heard. So the emotion just starts to disappear. It might be, well, we've got to do things a little bit different now. What do we want this to look like? But something that honors both people.
Absolutely. And that is the best way to resolution, is having that conversation, is what is the pace? What needs to change? How does it need to change? Does this fit everybody? Does this make sense? Do you see, take ownership of the piece that you own?
Yeah.
And
because I know for myself, one of the last things I want to do for another, for you specifically, well, for everybody, but in this example, I don't want you to abandon yourself and what you hold important to you, because I have an emotion that's coming up. Right. And so it's important to understand that our emotions shouldn't have to change people, and I can look throughout my life at times that other people's emotions have changed me or made me shift direction or go this way or that way or become something that I wasn't because of what those emotions were and what I made them mean about me. And so I don't ever, when I'm sharing with someone, want them to have to shift who they are in order to please me. Right. And I think we get a lot of us get confused about that in relationships with others, going, you need to change this because this is making me uncomfortable. Now, sometimes that can absolutely, if someone has a drinking problem or an addiction or something like that that's affecting a lot of people, yeah, there might need to be conversations about that. Go ahead.
No, keep going. I was just going to say that that addiction comes from that story, and it could be an abandonment
Yeah.
that led to the addiction because you're not
Yeah.
seeing that for what it is, the story, that it's the illusion, that it's not real.
Yeah.
And no, I have to do this because I have to cover up all of this pain that I've made up myself.
Yeah. 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 Because, yeah, I guess a lot of addictions do come back to that abandonment and it's filling that void within the self through the addiction. And that's why it becomes an addiction because you constantly need more because the void actually starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger because the emotions are not actually being looked at. And uh, to kind of rephrase on what you had said, yeah, this pain that you're causing yourself, but first recognizing that it's okay that you've had this
Yes.
pain.
Yeah.
Right? It's okay if you felt sad, if you felt abandoned, if you felt any of these things, that's okay. Recognize that, allow yourself to express it, allow yourself to cry it out, punch it out, whatever. And then start to ask yourself, in what ways have I been wrong about what this story is? And maybe not wrong. In what ways have I misperceived this experience? In what ways have I mistaken this picture in my mind of what this means? And what have I created it to mean?
And do I own it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do I really own it? And I was thinking there is time that I don't want to say there's a time that it is okay to abandon people because we're never going to abandon people. It's just in my mind that it's not the case. But sometimes people need space.
Yeah.
People need time to process. You're not abandoning them, and the person on the other side of that should feel that as well. So, but I mean, it's part of having that conscious communication.
Yes.
I'm not abandoning you. I just need time to think. I just need space.
Yeah.
Or I need to be by myself so I can sort this out.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's getting curious. And you'll get to where you need to go.
Yeah. No, I've actually I had seen a video about that because there's some people who do need to process within their own minds and other people who process out loud. I tend to be a person who processes out loud. You tend to be a person that goes within your head. And what the therapist had actually suggested is if you need time to yourself to kind of think about things, we would go, okay, so we're going to separate for say the next 4 hours. But in 4 hours, we're going to come back and we're going to have a discussion. And so it's honoring that, but then it's also honoring for me because I want to process out loud. It's going, okay, so we're going to come back to it at this point in time, which is super, super beneficial. Because yeah, and one of the things that you had done for me after, so when we were supposed to go on the first Camino and then it didn't happen and came home and I was feeling just abandoned in all of the greatest ways that I could feel it. And one of the most beautiful things that you had said to me, but I was not very happy when he said it to me. I was down in, I think you had shown me a video and the video just sent me down another spiral of just feeling all my feelings. And he looked at me and he said, I can't help you with this. This is something you need to figure out on your own. I can't make you happy again. I can't make this go away. You need to go into this. You need to figure it out. And I was so angry at him. I was like, how dare you say this? Well, another part of me was going, yeah, you're absolutely right. I need to dig into this deeper. I need to go into this and I need to fully understand what's going on here. And so I think if I hadn't worked on abandonment as much as what I had already at that point in time, it probably would have turned into a fight or
Well,
whatever. But
and that's where when I was going through the stuff on the Camino, I knew I had to deal with I got the words back to me.
Yeah,
You need to figure this out. You need to do this, right?
yeah,
But what I was going to say is that have that conversation, because at least have that conversation to say, hey, this is what we need to do. If you're having an argument, okay, we need to take a break. You do this, you do that, draw, say your ground rules so that you can come to that resolution.
yeah. And to be
But don't
willing.
just walk away and then the story start. And the other person walks away and the story start. And then you have this problem, now you have this problem, now you have this problem. Just have the conversation.
Yeah.
Say, hey, we have an issue here. This could turn into argument, or I feel this way, or whatever. But I need time to process this, and I need time to think about it.
Yeah.
And if you need to process it your way, I'm going to process it my way. I'm not trying to ignore this, or I'm not sweeping it under the rug. I just need some time.
Yeah.
But be committed to come back to that and continue that same conversation.
Yeah. And I think too, the willingness to see it from another's perspective or to understand your own misperceptions. Because there has been times I know in our relationship, and I know from talking to many other people in their relationships as well, that sometimes we'll walk away from an argument and go, okay, so we need time. And then we create a new story and a new story and a new story and a new story. And we're not even willing to listen to the person when we come back to meet a space of resolution because now we've got 10 more reasons as to why we're pissed off at them, why we're angry at them. And we're not even willing to forgive them. We're not willing to listen to them. We're not willing to hear what they've discovered. And it can be so detrimental to a relationship if all you're looking for is something new to blame them for, looking for new reasons to abandon them, looking for new reasons as to why they're not lovable or whatever the case might be.
Feeding that ego more firewood to get things, going exactly how it wants. And you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And it's especially because our emotions are also intertwined with each other and our experiences are so intertwined with each other. So a feeling of abandonment at birth, and then it's say you're in the hospital when you're 6 months old. So it reaffirms that abandonment. And then maybe you fall off your bike when you're 5 and there's no one around and you've got a big bloody knee or whatever, and then it makes you feel abandoned again. And the school bus drops you off when you're 8 and mom's not there at the corner to pick you up. So now you're feeling abandoned again. So it's like these experiences grow and grow and grow and grow. And a lot of times then when we get into an argument, say with a spouse or with somebody, and that feeling comes up, it's suddenly fueled by all of the energy of all those emotions that have not been experienced or expressed, or not experienced, but haven't been expressed throughout the years. So it feels like it's a much bigger deal than all of those other things. Yeah. It's almost like our mind takes these screenshots to go, and here we are. Here's the proof over and over and over again.
Yeah, I was just having a little thought about going back to the disconnection from source, and that we all have this disconnection. We all have this piece. So we're never alone. And to me, in my journey, that was probably the biggest aha moment. It was just like, oh, that's what this is.
Yeah.
And as I started getting more curious about things, it was like, we trace things back and we're all just energy and we're all connected. We're all still connected. We're never abandoned. We just let the ego and the illusions of these stories continue to make our decisions for us.
Yeah.
And I was kind of, kind of a sensitive topic, but I was just thinking about when we were talking about babies and thinking about women with postpartum depression and wondering if that's not how abandonment manifests in the woman when a baby is born. That abandonment piece, because now the child is separated, if that is really a deep core wound that manifests in that depression. I don't know. It came in,
Yeah.
something came up, and
It's
I
just-
thought it'd be something to have the conversation about.
Yeah.
But I mean, it all depends on disposition
I
and
mean,
whatnot,
there's
I
so many
guess.
layers to that because I think
Absolutely, but I do think there is some merit in that as well.
no, I agree with you. I'm just thinking like for a woman to become a mother, especially the first time, there's an abandonment of the self,
Yeah,
right? Because now you're a mother. And as mothers, you're taught, you sacrifice everything for your child, right? And so when a woman's giving birth to a baby, she's essentially, or kind of how it's fed to women, is now you're no longer an individual, you're a mother.
yeah.
And you've got this
Another
extension of
another
yourself.
story that
Yes, but you've got this extension of yourself outside of you, and you must put this first.
yeah,
And if you don't, all of this is going to happen. And for a lot of women, I mean, after you've given birth, there's hormones.
yeah,
Your body's been ripped apart. Your body doesn't look the same. Everything has
yeah,
essentially changed. You're getting no sleep. Your boobs are sore. Your vagina's like everything is just, it's changed.
yeah,
And it's supposed to be the most glorious time of your life, right? And it doesn't necessarily always feel that way. You love your newborn baby,
yeah,
but there is this kind of, I guess, pressure of the beauty of what motherhood is supposed to be versus the reality of everything that's happening in your body. I remember after I had my first, um, I was at my mom's house, and I think the oldest was, I don't know, 3 days old or something like that. And I had gone to have a bath, and she brought me in a plate with grilled cheese and grapes. And I sat eating it in the bathtub, just bawling and wondering why I was so sad. Because it's like, this is supposed to be the best, but it didn't necessarily feel the best, but
yeah.
everything changed.
And that's why I wonder, this is something I'm going to do some thinking about,
Okay.
because I do think that a lot of that, not the hormones, because I mean, we can't control what's our chemical makeup and whatnot, but a lot of those things that stories that have been told over time are, again, they're illusions, but it's
Yeah.
breaking free from that.
Yeah.
And I understand that there's a lot of things that we have done right. There's a lot of things that, as a society in general, there's a lot of things we've also done wrong.
Yeah.
And but less learning and moving on and making things better and moving forward is the way to resolution, I guess. But
Yeah.
um, I do think that there's a piece in there that hits probably harder than anything else, and that's that coupled with whether it's a chemical imbalance or hormones or whatever within the body, that's it's worth taking some time with.
Yeah. Yeah. And to
Sorry,
no, you don't need to
thinking out
apologize.
loud.
No, I think it's great because it's these abandonment things, they come in from 100 different directions, right? Um, and so it's important to have these kind of discussions and even to just get curious. And when you've got a thought that comes up, I think it's so important to just express the thought, because there's merit to it. There's a reason that it's being brought up. Yeah. Because even for a mother, if she does go into postpartum depression and to no fault of her own, but I do wonder, what does that disconnect feel like for the child? And depending on the different levels of postpartum, and also the disconnection from a father,
Yeah.
right? Like if dad's not around, if dad goes straight back to work or
Yeah.
whatever the case might be, like,
Well, it's great, right? Because we've all been abandoned many times
yeah,
for good reasons.
yeah,
Inception being one of them.
Yeah.
And but we put this negative spin on it. It's just like,
Well, and I
okay.
think because when we're born, we're so innocent, right? We have no idea what this abandonment actually means, right? Or if we're a baby and we're in our bed and we're crying or whatever, it might seem like an eternity to a newborn to cry for 2 minutes, and
Mhm.
mom's right there and picks us up. But because we're so young, we're so innocent, we have no idea what this whole world entails. We make it mean something it doesn't. It's kind of like
Yeah.
when you're a child. I remember when I was a kid, we watched the Boogeyman on the Disney Channel, or not Disney Channel, but like Sunday night on Disney,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Sunday
Yeah.
night movie or whatever. So my sister and I watched the Boogeyman and we were terrified. And I rewatched that as an adult and I was like, this is like the stupidest movie ever. Like it's so lame, it's so cheesy. Like, why was I even scared? But it's just the difference of the innocence of the child
Yeah.
versus the understanding of the adult that can look at the past to go, that's not actually what that meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, you received it that way. Yeah, you took it in. Yeah, you were terrified. We still remember that feeling of being terrified because my hands even get sweaty when I think about like that movie and how scared I was as a child.
Yeah.
So it's understanding the emotion was real, but
Yes.
the way we saw it was through these very innocent eyes that had never experienced that before. So we create it to be something that's so much more than what it actually is. And so just understanding that innocence that we have and loving that innocence, but then also making sure they rewatch the movie as an adult so they can see there was really nothing to be terrified about in the first place. Or,
Well, and I think that's a whole kind of metaphor for abandonment is you're throwing you with a movie example, you got the ego in there,
yeah,
you have the abandonment piece, you have all of the stories that come up through, and the emotion piece as well.
yeah,
And it's just a story.
yeah, yeah. The ego is the boogeyman.
Yeah.
That was hiding in the closet with a green glow coming out. That's
Yeah.
what scared me the most was a green glow.
You just got to give the boogeyman a hug.
Yes. Just open the door and see that he's just a gentle giant.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you guys have any questions or anything that you'd like to share? Pop it into the chat. We were hoping to have more conversation, but we didn't actually say that at the beginning. So if there's anything that you want to share, any questions that you have, feel free to pop them into the chat.
Yeah, I really part of this show or podcast. I didn't really want it to be part of a discussion, a two-way discussion or three-way, whatever. Um, Not just we get on here and talk as we can talk and talk and talk. But I think our whole point of doing this is to try and help people and just get our community to a better place and build and reshape the community and just for the better, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just want to help people.
Yeah. So Julia is saying this has been very good. We have a fair bit to think about. Very interesting. Did you want to say anything, Julia and Jacob? Go ahead.
We were just talking about how much how interesting it was and the different things it brought up like as you were talking among us then, right? So like, oh well, I remember this or maybe this. Like Jacob was in NICU.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, there was definitely some aha moments.
Yeah.
when you were
Awesome.
having
Good.
the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's these little things that come up that you don't pay any attention to, right? It's like, okay, that was you just move on from in life. Oh, this happened. It's not a big deal. And then next thing, oh, you start looking at all these different times that this has
Right.
come up, and it's like that didn't need to happen. But,
yeah. Yeah.
Yes, well,
And
you connect the dots and you
Yeah.
create the picture.
right. Right. Yeah. And it was an interesting John, the comment about postpartum, because I think they are doing some research with our daughter-in-law is a midwife, and our daughter lost her first baby. And actually, our daughter-in-law did as well. But and so some of this from between the two of them, I can't remember which one said what, but anyway, the point was that that postpartum, it is because you're supposed to, it's not all completely, there's hormones and everything else, but you're supposed to be taking care of your body and taking care of your child. And then when you have your child, you're now it's a different way of doing it. And you start to have those fears maybe.
Yeah.
And all of that. And it becomes an abandonment because you had this part figured out. You had 9 months, you got it.
Yeah.
Like, we'll just stay like this, right? And then you have a baby and now you got to do all this other stuff.
Oh,
So
Yeah.
sometimes, yeah, like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So sometimes like they look into some of that
Yeah.
as well. And well, Jacob's mom had postpartum.
Yes.
Well, seemed to have postpartum, but then she also had other stuff and
They described it that way. My mother was long-term depression sufferer
Mm.
well after being
Yes.
told it was postpartum depression. So
Yeah.
if it was, the timing was identical. It was
Yes.
it was the perhaps the pinnacle or the point where her depression could no longer be ignored.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think those two kind of probably are cousins or whatever, postpartum and depression. Like
Yeah.
I know about a good deal about depression and whatnot, and I do think it gets easily. We are easy to shove pills down people's throats. If
Yeah.
it's a problem that really you just need to have the conversation. You just need to, again, get curious about where is this feeling coming from? What,
Yeah.
you know, am I really alone? Am I really this or that?
Yeah. I think one of
Mhm.
the most powerful quotes that I seen last year was that the opposite of depression is not joy, it's expression.
Mhm.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting. I like that.
I do too, because
Yeah.
for a long time, I always thought if I'm depressed, I have to get back to joyful, right?
Right.
But it's
Yeah.
what in me needs to be expressed, what emotions in me need to be expressed. And it's through that expression that the heaviness that we've been feeling doesn't actually weigh us down so much
Right.
anymore.
Yeah. Well, sometimes if you express things as well, even if it's just to yourself, but I mean, or you meditate and express, then you're actually, I don't know, you feel lighter in the sense that you're hearing yourself
Yeah.
and you can have a conversation with yourself, as you guys have been saying, right?
Yeah.
And then you can start to see, because I've noticed if I felt like that, I will then notice, okay, but kind of like the gratitude journal idea, right? Where, okay, what's okay? And sometimes I'll go out to the yurt and I'll just sit in the center of the yurt and think about how wonderful it is to have this space and,
Yeah.
and hear nature and just be in the middle, and people can't see me from anywhere. I'm now the one hiding, right?
Yeah.
But it gives you that conversation moment and that chance to, I guess, appreciate the things you sort of just think about.
Yeah.
You just don't think about them as appreciation all the time. Like I try to do, I don't always get it done every day, but I try to do a gratitude journal every morning.
Yeah.
At some
It
point
is
in
hard.
the day. It is hard to fit it in.
Yeah.
They have new products now, like a 2-minute gratitude journal that's and it's like an evening thing that you just kind of do quickly as you get into bed,
Yeah.
because
We do
That's-
our two good things, a feeling,
Oh.
gratitude at dinner time. So we go
At
around the
dinner,
table
okay.
and everybody talks about how their day was and hits these
Yeah.
points as we go along.
Yeah, same thing. Like it doesn't have to be at bedtime or morning or whatever. It's kind of when it fits in. But yeah, all good because it gets that conversation going inside your head, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there was another thing we were talking about earlier was, and it goes back to abandonment, but how we're taught all of these things and these stories. And I showed you that video today with the fleas. And
Yes,
the
this was interesting, actually.
So I'll let you explain because
So essentially, scientists took fleas and they put them in a jar and put a lid on the jar, and the fleas bounced around inside of the jar. The scientists took the lid off of the jar. The fleas continued to bounce to the exact same level as the lid, but could not go out any higher. They removed the jar, and the fleas just stayed in the same shape as the jar, but never went any higher or outside of what the barriers of the jar were.
okay.
Right. And so the jar was an illusion after a while, and it was passed on
yeah,
generations
that's
of
which I
fleas.
found what was really interesting is they said the offspring of those fleas would do this exact same thing as their
Yeah.
parents or whatever. They would jump in the same pattern and not.
Right.
Stay in this
Yeah.
kind of illusion. And so when it comes to the abandonment wound, or really any wound, to ask yourself, am I stuck within the limitations of the
Yeah.
generations before me, or the limitations of what my own life has been? And
Yeah.
is the lid off and I'm literally just
Yeah.
standing in the same place,
Yeah.
jumping over it
Did I
all
create,
night?
did I, or do I continue, did I create my own prison?
Yeah.
And do I continue,
To
or did somebody else
Stay
create
in it.
prison and I continue to stay in
Remain.
prison?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a very interesting, because it makes me think of intergenerational trauma we've talked about,
Yeah.
right? Because it's coming back from there, and you're now sitting in this spot, and you just don't know that you just pop the top off and walk out. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, like if you
Yeah.
truly were to just recognize, I am absolutely worthy and I am so loved, and just
Mhm.
totally take that in without any of the illusion of what your experiences have been in life, life would be
Right.
completely different.
For sure.
But it's
Absolutely.
hard to create that line between
Yeah.
the two. But to even
Yeah.
recognize, oh, right, I'm not creating a line between the two. I've still got this small story playing. That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
come back to my truth now.
And sometimes too, I think that whatever your experiences have been, as much as they can hold you back, I think that they can also propel you forward or create who you are. So the sense of resilience, like I think I got my sense of resilience from polio at 4,
Yeah.
right? And all those things that I waded through and whatever, and as life went on and so on. And I probably would not be as strong an individual if that hadn't happened. Not that I recommend that, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean, right? If you
Yeah.
had to go through the damn thing, you might as well turn it into something good.
And that's just it, right?
You
It's
know?
what do we do with the experiences that we've had? Because we
Yeah.
can take I mean, you can look at siblings in a family and,
Yeah.
they both have an alcoholic father. One
Mm-hmm.
sibling goes, I'm never drinking because my dad was an alcoholic. And the other sibling goes, I'm drinking because my dad was an alcoholic. It's the exact same
Yeah.
experience. It's what are you going to create from it? What are you going to make it mean for you? And how are you going to, essentially, what are you going to express because of this experience?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know in the post polio groups that I am part of as support groups, um, a lot of what they're telling me is they've actually figured out that the people who survive polio tend to be type A personalities. They just will drive through, because if you didn't,
Blessing and a curse, right? Here's a gift that comes with this.
horrible thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and I found that to be actually somewhat reassuring, because I thought, well, that explains how I always managed to get into trouble all the time. That did it. You know what I mean? Like, because you don't understand, why did you question everything?
Yeah.
Well, of course, because I had a lot of questions I couldn't express at 4. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, no, I think is take what you have and hopefully move forward. Be smart enough to check if there's a lid on the jar.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Well, this has been so great to connect with you guys tonight. Do you have any other questions or anything you'd like to share?
Well, I was going to comment, because you really brought it back to the jar piece, was the fact that sometimes you don't realize that you're stuck in a jar.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't
Yeah.
realize that's what's happening.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was that movie where they had some guy living in basically on a big set.
Oh, the Truman Show.
Yeah.
Thank you, the Truman Show, right? So he's living his life, not realizing he is in a fishbowl, that he is in a jar, right?
That's
And
true.
so you don't realize that you've put a limit on yourself.
Yeah.
Because you don't recognize it as a limit.
Yeah.
Right. And then the shame that you feel later on when you realize, crap, I was doing that.
Yeah.
That's what I did. that's what happened, and I didn't realize it. I
Yeah.
missed it, right? And then you live with this fear that, well, what else am I missing?
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And not that you
Another
want to be
box,
paranoid
another
about it.
box.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be paranoid about it because that's going to exhaust you as well
Mhm.
when you need to put your energy into other things. But it's like, okay, what else represents a limit, right? Where am I actually, allowing, yourself to go free? And it reminds me of that quote from Stephen Hawking. And I've seen, I'm a science nerd, just so you know.
Awesome.
But
Same.
okay, very good. But anyway, there was one video I remember I showed it when I don't know if Julia told you this or not, but I'm a high school teacher, and for 2/3 of my career, I taught in a young offenders facility, and I had this one video that I would show the kids, and in the very opening part, I would really emphasize to them because all of these kids are obviously confined in secure custody for good reason, and they would be at times feeling sorry for themselves because they are being confined, and me being the sort of hard ass person I can be would basically say, look, you're here for good reason, stop complaining about it, but I want to show you this video for a number of reasons, but the opening line is the piece I really want you to pay attention to. And Stephen Hawking would make the comment that even though I am confined to this wheelchair, in my mind I am free.
Yes.
And that's the piece that I would emphasize to him, that you're free in your mind. You always will be.
Yeah.
Right. So
No, that's
What a great thing to share with these guys. Yeah. And how many people live, yes, Hawking's had these physical ailments, but he was more free than virtually 90% of the people that are walking this planet. So
Yeah.
it's almost as if, well, I can't do these things, so I'm going to do a whole lot of this other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, guys. This was
Thank
Thank
great.
you. And thanks
Oh,
for joining in on the conversation too. It was really great to
Oh,
have an opportunity to chat and connect. And we look forward
yes.
Sure.
to next Sunday. We'll be back
Yep.
and sharing
Sounds
more.
good.
No
Excellent.
idea
We
what we'll be
look forward to
talking
it.
about, but-
We put it in our calendar and we keep reminding one another, and
Awesome.
we're doing some interesting things with our kids on doing like an escape room.
Escape room. Yeah.
Yeah, but not in person. But so that if we can't get to their house, we can do it on Zoom, and it's like an envelope. It's a Canadian company,
yeah.
and it's an envelope. Your long lost cousin finds you, and episode 1, 2, you have to find him. We work together on it, even on Zoom if we can't get to one another's place.
Oh,
But we
very
always
cool.
say, well, yeah, it is pretty cool. So we always say, well, Sunday night we can't, so we have an appointment.
Oh, I
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much, guys. Enjoy
you.
tomorrow.
Take care.
Take care.
Thanks. Have a good
Bye.
day, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.